Hello and welcome to the Morph Beaks channel. I'm Patrick Shoemaker. Today I'd love to talk about some jazz albums and show my favorites and their connection to modern music. Here we have a couple quick examples, some of my favorite jazz fusion albums. We'll talk a little bit about R&B, maybe a little soul too. What is their connection to this? Deep Purple. Some of you may see right away that connection. There's also a connection, surprisingly, to Van Halen and the Smashing Pumpkins. So we'll connect the dots from Billy Cobham to Massive Attack, Prince, Smashing Pumpkins, and much more. But we'll concentrate first on my favorite jazz albums that I've been listening to lately. And at the end, we'll get to those bonus, I wouldn't call them random facts. They're very interesting facts and connections that I hadn't made until recently. And I will say, one of the ways I did make that connection was through this documentary, which was fascinating. So with that, stick with me and enjoy some smooth jazz. The one thing I can say with smooth jazz, of course, this is jazz fusion. This is my second favorite Billy Cobham album. Cobham, down south in America. If you're British, Billy Cobham. Cobham, if you live down south where I was born and raised, but I've moved north from them since. And with that being said, I got to say I'm coming to you from Minnesota, not far from the Minneapolis Sound, just south of that. So there is a very interesting Prince connection as well. And I will quickly add, my favorite jazz album of the 80s is Routes by Ramsey Lewis. Must thank my daughter and Alexandria and Drew. They have shown me the way of Ramsey Lewis. And I'm so thankful for that. We've been on a jazz kick lately. So coming up soon, I will have 100 favorite albums of the 80s. And it's going to feature a lot of new wave, a lot of classic rock, post-punk, punk. But we've been listening to jazz lately. And as I said, we're going to make that connection to Deep Purple, Smashing Pumpkins, Massive Attack, Prince, all heavily influenced by jazz. So recently acquired, have been desiring this Ramsey Lewis live, Hang On, Ramsey, early Ramsey Lewis, one of his most popular, I should say, Ramsey Lewis trio. Spectacular to find this in such mint condition. And we'll show you the actual vinyl in a moment here. That leads to this. Let's talk about the in crowd. Very, very cool. Really awesome cover here. You can see the limo. You can see the crowd waiting to get in. Another limo here. Ramsey and the trio performing spectacular covers and original songs. This earlier Ramsey Lewis trio features two Beatles songs, A Hard Day's Night and I Love Her. And in 1965, so very shortly after the Beatles, Beatlemania had hit America and the whole world for that matter. Here's a few other fun jazz vinyl records, cool albums. This one has a who's who of early, Duke Ellington. Of course, you can see some of these titles maybe on the cover here. Again, we'll pull the vinyl out at the end and show you. Here's another one that's fun. Jackie Gleason. Okay, this a little more mellow. Smooth jazz. Talking about smooth jazz, what I love is we've owned homes, we've lived in big houses, we've lived in small apartments and everything in between. But if you like to jam your music up loud, and sometimes I do like it loud, but we always used to have a joke about smooth jazz. So what neighbor is going to come over and knock on the door and say, hey, would you please turn down that smooth jazz? Because I can't take any more. I guess we're always in a good mood when we're listening to it and find that to be comical. And so far, so good. Here's Lou Rawls. You'll never find. Now, every time I hear that song, it makes my day, and you still hear it a lot. Very cool. Maybe more R&B, soul, with a hint of smooth jazz. And of course, the big hit song, You'll Never Find Another Love Like Mine. I used to always kind of think of it as You're Gonna Miss My Lovin', which always makes me think of Just the Two of Us, which of course is Bill Withers and a whole different song. Smooth, great memories used in cool movies. And I wanted to circle back real quick in a driving way because Routes, there he is with the steering wheel on the piano. Used to have this. Well, I got it as a gift in mint condition and gave it as a gift to those who showed me the way of Ramsey, and they cherish it to this day. Found one in mint condition. So that's why I'm showing you this one. But what I so love about it, it starts off kind of mellow and a bit of background singing, and it works its way into second gear, third gear, turbo overdrive at some point, ending with the amazing Hell on Wheels. So it builds up into some serious funk. And my favorite album, jazz album of the 80s. So I wanted to circle back and say Routes, highly, highly suggested. So, and interesting to see and hear the progression of Ramsey as he changes with the times. These two, of course, again, were live albums. And on Routes, you can hear the growth of Ramsey. And many prefer these early ones. I say you can't go wrong with any of his albums. I think he's involved in hundreds and hundreds of projects that everything I've heard from him was all spectacular. So how could you not mention Miles Davis? Well, we're going to do that right now. Shout out to my entire family. Shout out to Gary and Laura. Shout out to Alex and Drew. And also to Don and Bridget. Without them, none of this is possible. So we've got to talk about Miles Davis because this is a favorite here. Why do we talk about Miles? Because he's clearly one of the best, was a legend in his time, and timeless music that he gave us lives on forever. So we circle back because Billy Cobham got his start, or in the early days, was performing with Miles. So this is a much talked about album. It's fully spectacular, featuring Tommy Bolin, Leland Sklar, and so many phenomenal, I believe the Brecker brothers, it's just phenomenal all the way around musicianship in that. So here you have Tommy Bolin right here. And this was his first album with Deep Purple, and really only studio album with Deep Purple. Some people don't even consider this a Deep Purple album. I love Deep Purple, and I think it's a really great album. There are some songs on here that are really, really bluesy. So Tommy Bolin was the guitarist and discovered because of his phenomenal work on this album. So one of the songs on this album, Stratus, was covered by Prince, Jeff Beck, and many, many, too many to mention. And this whole album is so dynamic, fast, slow, loud, soft. Some of the greatest drumming you will ever hear. Very much influenced many different drummers. That's where this comes into play. The drumming. Because Jimmy Chamberlin was a jazz drummer, jazz-trained drummer. And he got within Smashing Pumpkins as an original member. Was in and out of the band a little bit there years ago. When I saw him in the Adore tour, it was Kenny Aronoff, who also was a great drummer, is a great drummer, and they sounded phenomenal either way. I always loved the low end on the Smashing Pumpkins bass and the drums locking in. So Jimmy Chamberlin, huge, huge, huge Billy Cobham fan, as is Alex Van Halen. And if you listen to Hot for Teacher, and I can show that more in a minute. That's, of course, not on this album. This is my favorite Van Halen album. But if you listen to Hot for Teacher, you can distinctly hear a riff that opens up that song that's so memorable, that is derivative of Billy Cobham and was done in homage of him per Alex Van Halen, who I can't say is an underrated drummer. Everybody knows his greatness. But when you talk Van Halen, you talk Eddie, everybody, rightfully so. But what an amazing drummer Alex Van Halen is. As we said, Prince was also a huge Billy Cobham fan and said to be a big Tommy Bolin fan. And interesting story about Prince. Many years ago, Eric Clapton was asked, who's the greatest, how does it feel to be the greatest guitarist alive? And he said, go ask Prince. I don't always agree with everything Eric Clapton ever said and did. I sure agree with that comment. This is really cool, 12-inch, Let's Go Crazy, and has just one of my favorite B-sides, Erotic City. Funky. Huge fan of how that vinyl looks as well. Okay, so quickly, here's some of the rest of the Deep Purple collection. Started buying these, bought these like 99 cents when I was very young. So I started off with Burns, so I had a particular fascination with that part of the band as a very young vinyl collector. This one here, purple vinyl. Gotta love that for Deep Purple. And here we have Made in Europe. We'll do a deeper dive on the different eras, different marks of the band. I've already shown this one, talked a bit about it. Come taste the band. Really cool. Like a greatest hits. When we rock, we rock. When we roll, we roll. I could go on and on. I love the musical circle, talking in circles about music. This one you don't see a lot. It's a Perfect Strangers 12-inch. The interview, it is an interview. I prefer the music over the interview, I guess. Well, I know. But it's super cool, so play side A. When we're talking about vinyl, you gotta love talking about the Beastie Boys. And is there a jazz connection there? Of course there is. So many samples. My favorite on this is Shadrach. My family. We all love Shadrach. You don't hear that one as much. I think it's coolly sampled. Check it out. What's really wild about this is it just kind of goes on for days on end. It's one big party. And it's phenomenal. I received it as a gift from my daughter. We've been giving vinyl back and forth for many years. She's in her 30s, and her and her other half, Drew, they just love to have a good system that I started them off with, and he just put a new needle in it. Okay, hot sauce. We got to show hot sauce. More Beastie Boys. Because again, the connection was and is, this was a double vinyl, white vinyl, jazz. And the jazz really, to me, goes to the Paul's Boutique album. Okay, so, but you say, we're supposed to be talking about jazz, but we still can. We still can. The mix-up. I heard a person, album reviewer, who does a great job. He said he just didn't really care for the Beastie Boys. Most people do. But if you don't, it's not your cup of tea, that's fine. Then check this out. Because what is this and why? Because this is the mix-up, and it's all instrumental. So maybe you don't like the Beastie Boys. I'll bet you like that album. Some solid gold hits with the DVD. To the Five Boroughs. Got all kinds of Beastie Boys collections here. So I guess you could say we're fans. A couple more. Hello Nasty. And you just can't go wrong. License to Ill, all the Beastie Boys stuff. Big fans. It's held the test of time quite well, I think. I remember when they started. I remember when they hit MTV. One more jazz release on CD that I'd love to mention. Charlie Hunter. This is just super cool. I love the racing motif. the jazz music fits it fully. And it's just so super cool. Ready, set, Shango. Check that out. Great for a road trip. Or if you're having company over, you don't have to talk over the lyrics. Smooth jazz. And one more, as I mentioned, Massive Attack earlier. Great cover featuring Stratus. Highly suggested as well. It's not on this album. There's some Massive Attack. And we'll wrap it up by saying my top jazz suggestions of jazz fusion. Spectrum, all-time favorite. Very close behind and an underrated, phenomenal, great album, Total Eclipse. Lou Rawls, All Things in Time. Ramsey Lewis Trio, The In Crowd, Hang On Ramsey, and Routes. So thanks for coming along on this adventure. I love talking in circles about jazz because it is where a lot of things start. Even Ian Pace, many great drummers have that jazz influence, and you can certainly hear that in bands, and I think you always will. So thanks for joining us for this musical adventure, and a special thanks to all you who have supported my channel and helped me along the way. Let me know what you're listening to.